Hello and welcome to the Martinus Institute's YouTube channel and our second interview in a series of interviews that we are carrying out this spring. My name is Pernilla Rosell. I'm sitting at the moment in Klint in Denmark, in the Martinus Center in Klint. And I have the privilege today of interviewing my friend and colleague, Micael Söderberg, as we would say in Swedish. Michael, you could say in English. Welcome.
Thank you, Pernilla. I'm pleased to be here.
Yeah, and you are in Stockholm at the moment, I think.
Yes, I am.
So as you will understand, you who are listening, we are Swedish, both of us, and we will try to carry this interview out in English as well as we can. And we are, of course, here because we have been interested in the Danish spiritual writer Martinus in many years. And that's actually how we two met. And we just remembered before this interview, it must have been in 2008 that we met each other for the first time. And we share many interests, of course, this spiritual interest, but we share the interest in the topic that we will talk about today. We will focus on today, and that is actually gender and sex and the transition of our gender roles. And those of you who are familiar with Martinus's writings know that it's actually basic in order to understand his whole work, to understand what he calls the analysis of the pole transformation or the sexual pole transformation. And we will come back to that. But what I was thinking about before we start is that the whole idea when you want to learn something about gender, you will be able to introduce yourself shortly, Michael, but we could say already that you are a trained sociologist. And of course, you know a lot then about society and, for example, gender roles and other things. But if I want to understand something about gender roles, it's not perhaps so typical that I would expect to find answers in a spiritual writer, because I think today, at least in Sweden, in our age, so to speak, in our time, you would probably go to spiritual writings if you want to explore questions like, what's the meaning of life? And who am I? Where do we come from? Is there life after death? Why is there so much suffering in the world? Is there a God? Can I communicate with God, and how, and so on? All those extremely deep and personal questions would be typical, at least for me, if I want to turn to spiritual writings. But I would probably also study sociology if I wanted to learn something about gender and gender theory and what happens to the gender roles of today. So the fascinating thing with Martinus is, of course, that he writes so much about this and in a way has an overall world picture that combines all these things. But we said before we started this interview that we would, in a way, go back to when you first came into contact with Martinus's analysis, because I know that it was in the middle of the 80s, I think. You have told me, and I was very moved by it, that especially when you read about his analysis of our sexual transformation, you immediately felt that this was so important that this, in a way, it would play a great role for the rest of your life. And I really remembered when you said that. So could you tell us a little about what was it that you sort of made you so dedicated?
Yeah, of course, Pernilla, I will tell you. And I was about 21 years old, and I had been studying Martinus just for a couple of months, I think. And I have a background, as you said, in sociological studies. And that's also where I came into contact with Martinus, because it was one of my fellow students who introduced me to Martinus. And we were talking about life and how it all started and how the universe started and so forth. So I didn't know anything about his writings about the poles or sexuality or marriage or things like that. So I began to read his analysis and was interested in understanding life in general and eternity and infinity and so forth. Where do we all come from? Where are we going? Why are we here? Like you said. But then I remember when I was at the library in the town where I was studying in Växjö, Sweden, in Småland. I was sitting there and looking at the other volumes. I think I had read a little bit in volume 1, perhaps the whole book. I can't remember, it was so long ago. But I was curious about what he was writing about in the other books. So I sort of looked into them and went through the pages rather quickly. And then I stumbled upon some sections in volume 3 in Leavitt's book. And there he uses the word homosexuality, and he talks about, or rather he writes about a person who come to understand himself as a homosexual person, and he also describes very vividly how this person have mixed feelings about this, and the person also sort of can't talk about it with other people, and it's of course a big change for that person. And I was really moved by these descriptions, since I also could relate to that description. I had been accepting myself as a gay person or homosexual person, as we say, for a couple of years earlier. And when I was about 18, 19, I sort of fell in love with a person of the opposite sex. And of course, that was an overwhelming experience. And I didn't find it really difficult to accept, even if it was overwhelming, because I thought of that feeling like it was something positive. It was a feeling of love for that person. So I said to myself, this can't be wrong. This must be right, because I only feel positive feelings towards this person. And well, he sort of liked me too. Maybe not as much as I was into him, but we had a relationship for a couple of months and so. So that's where my life started as a gay man then. And as you said, I didn't expect to find writings about this in books that were explaining spiritual things and matters of life and death and things like that. And so when I saw that he was also writing about sexuality and specifically homosexuality, I was really impressed and really inspired and thought that this must be something for me to study for the rest of my life, as you said. And so I have also been reading this for the whole of my life, but of course not every day, not every month, but it has been with me since then and guided my life, so to speak. So that's kind of introduction to where I came into contact with the whole analysis.
Thank you, and that's actually very, very moving and very impressive. And just to stay a little with those personal memories, I was 16 in the year 1985, as you said, and I remember going to upper secondary school at the time, and can't remember that anyone ever talked about homosexuality. I would say now, which would not be true, I didn't have, I mean, I wouldn't know who in my class or in my school also had those kinds of relationships that you describe, because it was never talked about. So it has so much has happened since then. It's really a transformation of our society, but I can imagine it must also have mattered that there was so little information, at least positive information.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, as you said, society didn't talk about these things, and if you wanted to meet people, you had to. Well, we didn't have internet for a start, and if you wanted to meet people, you had to look into a newspaper for an advertise from someone who wanted to come into contact with people, and that's also kind of scary to write to a person you don't know, and even to meet that person, and you don't know who you are and what your feelings are really stand for, and you're not sure what the other person is going to be like, and do we have anything in common except for this feeling that, well, I don't want to marry, I don't like girls, and I haven't met any guys, but I sort of think that this is maybe something for me. And of course, there were also places you could go, but not in Växjö at that time. You had to go to Stockholm or to Copenhagen, and that's a big step for a young person to go to a place where gay people meet. And it's a sort of subculture where they have their own certain norms of how you should behave and how you shouldn't behave and how you should dress. And so that's a kind of new identity development you go through. When you come from the teens, you have gone through these puberty, and you might have learned some things about yourself. But if you also are beginning to explore your inner feelings for persons of the same sex, you go through another identity process where you have to learn who you are and how you can relate to other people and sort of find yourself in this situation. And I suppose it is a lot easier nowadays. We can even get married in in the northern countries and many countries all over the world as well. And that was not the case in the 80s. You couldn't talk about it with other people. It was also very difficult to talk with your parents and your friends, and so that's why I thought it also was so moving to read about Martinus's writings about this. How could he know this? It was a mystery to me. How could he know this? So, well, now I understand why he knows it, but so it was really inspiring. Of course.
Yeah, and it's as you say also, I mean, since then, this was in 1985, you have spent lots of time also studying his analysis in depth. You mentioned volume 3 of the Book of Life that's called Livets Bog in Danish and in all languages actually. But when we know, of course, he has dedicated a whole volume actually to this topic, to our overall development from what he would call a one-pole state to a double-pole state, which includes the phase of what we call homosexuality. And I, who also actually learned about Martinus's analysis from my father and from my grandmother, actually know very, very little about this topic. It wasn't something that they talked to me about when I was a child. It was something that I studied later on when I was an adult. So how could you remember something, that process when you sort of started studying the whole work and learned even more about this? Do you remember that now?
Yeah, well, sort of. I was reading quite a lot on my own for a period of about 3 years or so. I think I went to some sort of study group where a few people was also reading Martinus. But I don't think we read Leavitt's book, because we read a little book by, what's he called? Well, can't remember now, but a Swedish writer. He doesn't live anymore. Nils Carlén,
Nils
I think.
Carlén, yeah.
Yeah, he
Must
had
have
done
been.
a short book with a summary, I think. But so I read on my own, and that was not so easy, because in volume 2 and 3 he writes about comic chemistry, and he writes about the mystery of life and the life substances, I think it's called in
Yeah.
English, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And it's sort of rather abstract analysis about life, and very philosophical. But I think because I had a background in sociology, which is also a subject who is really abstract and philosophical as well. So I think I had sort of way of understanding this anyway. But of course it was difficult. And then I don't think I remember sort of developing my view of the pole analysis on my own. I think that came later, because I went to Clint in 1988, and there we studied Leavitt's book, volume 2. And of course, he doesn't write about the pole analysis there, but I think we talked about it a lot. And when I talked to the teachers and the other students who were there, we were probably talking about the pole analysis and also homosexuality, I think, in some way. At some point, I met another person who was gay. But I can't really remember when I really started to dig deeper into the pole analysis, so to speak. I'm not sure.
Because I know you're also you're very engaged in Stockholm, but also at the Martinus Center in Clint. You're giving lectures here, and you're also a member of the council. But I know that when you started giving lectures, you have always said that you were especially interested in those questions: what is typically male, what is female, what are men and women and human beings moving towards a third gender or a third sex, and all these transition phenomena, also like transgender identities and so on. It has been an area, as I understand, it has been an area that you have taken a particular interest in all the time.
Yeah, that's right. Because when I started to visit places where other gay people met, women and men, I also came into contact with people with different sexual identities or gender identities, and even transsexual people. And of course, I wanted to understand what is this, what is happening. And I also met men who were very feminine and women who were very masculine. And of course, one could just think that, well, that's how nature is. Some are feminine, some are masculine, and some are not. And that's no problem. But since I am a little bit of a researcher, I want to understand things. Of course, I thought it was interesting to try to understand this. And that's where the pole analysis come in, because Martinus actually write about this, and we can actually understand what is happening with these people with different gender identities. And nowadays it's also on a rather great topic, because or aktuellt, what you say, it's on everybody's lips. It's people are talking about it. Males who want to transform into females, and the other way, and even children who want to change their sex or gender. And we didn't talk about that in the 80s, but those people were there also. I met some of them, and of course I was also curious what is happening here. And I also wrote an essay when I did my, I think it's called bachelor or something, candidate in sociology.
Yeah, I would call it a bachelor.
Yeah, I was writing an essay about men who how they discovered their sexual identity and how they came out, so to speak. We were talking about a coming out process, and it starts with that you have some feelings inside and you sort of try to understand them, and they become more and more real to you, and you have your first contact with other people of same sex in a sexual manner, of course, and then you sort of build your own identity of who you are and what you want to be. And for some people, that includes questioning your own gender role and your own sex as well. So I didn't have a problem with that. Fortunately, I think, because I think it's very difficult. I think it's rather good or easy if you feel that I belong in I have the same social identity as my physical body. I think that's easier for a person. It's really difficult for those who want to change in society, of course, because we are not so tolerant always towards these people. There has been a change, but anyway, there's a lot of misunderstandings, and we don't really understand. People haven't read Martinus, and they
no,
haven't.
most people haven't.
No, and of course not the pole analysis. So.
Of course, Martinus has a completely different perspective when it comes to what is behind, because we won't go into all of his explanations here. We have lectures in our Martinus YouTube channel where you get beautiful pedagogical explanations of all his analysis, and you can also read his works on our website for free in English. But the main thing that we really need to remember, that he said this is not just sort of a physical thing, it's not a materialistic change, this is a mental huge transformation, and of course extremely fundamental in his worldview. This goes back to many lives. So just to mention, or to put it very simplistically, he would define us two, if we take us two as living examples, that we come from the animal kingdom. That's where we start off, and we have a primary pole that, when you look at us, we would deduce that my primary pole is the feminine pole and your primary pole is the masculine pole. That's why we look like a man and a woman. But today we are in a state of transition, which means that the two poles that we actually have all the time, that our secondary pole, which in my case is my masculine pole, and also all my intellectual capacities, and this pole is growing, and for men it's the opposite, it's the feminine pole that is growing. But this, of course, we can see this also in the physical world, as you describe. We can also see this. Some people look more feminine than masculine in different ways, but it is a mental process. It's invisible in a way. And that's what he wants to show us. It's consciousness that's behind everything, and it's also impossible to understand it if we don't realize that we have many lives. Do you remember when you first sort of connected this thought of reincarnation and evolution with the thought of gender and sex?
Well, I think when I started to read Martinus, I had already read some books about reincarnation. I was already thinking that that was a reality, that we live several lives. But I think many other books describes that, well, you can change your sex between different lives or your gender identity. Some lives you live as a woman, and other lives you live as a man.
Exactly.
And when I read Martinus, I understood that no, that's not the case, because as you said, if you are predominantly a male being or predominantly a female being, you are grounded in a one-poled consciousness, and you evolve, you develop through evolution and continue to be a female being or a masculine being. And at the time, this evolutionary process, the opposite pole within you develops more and more and start to affect your consciousness in different ways, not just the sexual aspects. That comes along rather late in evolution, I think. But the opposite pole, as you said, it also connects with intellectuality, thinking, and abstract thinking, and creative thinking, and humane faculties, and so forth. Everything that is connected to the primary pole is more or less based on a state where you are typically interested in persons of the opposite sex, and you are typically interested in building a family and supporting for the family, and everything outside the family is just something that you are not
Yeah.
You don't prioritize that.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you live for the family and for mating with your female or male partner, and to have children, and that's the basis of your life, because we come, as you said, from the animal kingdom. But as we go further into evolution, we sort of we no longer feel the urge to get married or to build up a family. And well, I can't really remember when I sort of started to understand these things. It came gradually, I think. But so now I'm so sort of I have read it so many times, so I it's a part of my thought climate. I can't really remember when it started to change, because that's how I see the world and reality nowadays. I'm so so to speak indoctrinated by Martinus analysis in a good way, I think, because it really affects my way of thinking and looking at life. So, but I think it came gradually, because I went through life and met different persons. I try to understand them and try to understand how can this man or woman feel or think the way he or she does. And I also try to understand it in relation to Martinus' analysis of the pole transformation. So, but it is a process. You understand them more and more when you study, and when you get experiences in life, you might want to read a little bit more and to understand these new experiences in relation to what you have read. So it's a continual process where you come into understanding of these analyses, I think.
It certainly is. And again, we have experienced such huge change in I mean, we are privileged in Scandinavia in many respects, and not least that we have the freedom to decide our sexual orientation, and I think is respected today and sort of appreciated today quite a different way. And I'm not an expert on the area, but the way I understand it, among young people today, they are much more open, much more flexible, and they also perhaps themselves experience this and sort of wait and try to find out who am I, and some of them might try out different relations, also perhaps with both sexes before it's not so binary for them. That was perhaps when I grew up, we have a huge majority heterosexual, and then we have a minority homosexual minority. Today it seems much more open and much more non-binary, and many people also really want to identify themselves as non-binary. That all this classification is too narrow in a way. And of course, if we look on this, as you say, we have read Martinus for such a long time, so we can't take those glasses off. But in my view, of course, that supports what he tells us about the development of life. Because when we grow more and more double pole and two pole, of course, we start experiencing life much more in a double pole state than we did before, even if we still have a long way to go. It's not a quick fix to read Martinus' analysis. And I guess when you started and got so touched by this, you were still a young man. Of course, you have had a long life since then. But I guess that you have sort of grown in your identity, and Martinus sort of had Martinus by the hand. He helped you perhaps when you developed your identity, because that's of course something that all of us do.
Yes, I think because I lived in partnership with another man for a long time, and then we split up, and I met another man, and I lived with him for many years, and so I haven't really been living on my own in my life, and that's a good thing. I don't want to live alone. So, but as you said, I could use the pole analysis to understand what is happening to me in this relationship, and because Martinus also talks about, like we said, marriage and amorous love and neighborly love, and he says that the thing that we want to get married, that's kind of, it's not the future, so to speak. We are going towards a state in consciousness where we don't want to get married, and or because we develop to be double-poled individuals, and we are, so to speak, whole within ourselves. We don't need another person to feel whole. But of course, we need to express our love towards other people. That doesn't go away. But the love we feel and the sexuality, how we express it, that will also change. And it has changed, because people now are more into caressing each other and kissing and expressing our love in a more humane way than perhaps we did several incarnations away. If we go to the 18th or 19th century, for example, we could only have sex within marriage and only in a specific way, I suppose. and so the sexual revolution that has been going on for the last perhaps 40, 50, 60 years or so have transformed our way of relating to each other. So it's not just gay people, also heterosexual people are engaged in different kinds of relationships than we used to have way back. And I suppose also the sexual behavior is also changing for heterosexual people. I don't know since I'm not hetero, but this pole transformation contributes to so many changes in our culture and in our personal lives and our relationships and so forth. So it's a huge topic. So that's why Martinus writes so much about it. And it has certainly been a help for me to understand, because when I was young, I was sort of, well, Martinus says we go through a kind of repetition period before we reach our sort of mature stage during the 30s, so to speak. And when I was 20 years old and lived in a partnership with another man, I was another person then than I am now, of course, because we we grow as a human being in our life. But so that was a kind of period where I thought of myself, well, I'm not sure I really like this person I am right now. I would like to have some other kind of relationship, and even though we really, well, we loved each other, but it was really difficult as well. We had a lot of conflicts and well, we were really different persons, so we didn't get along in everyday life. But even though we loved each other and we kind of love each other today as well, we haven't split up as friends, but I was longing for another kind of relationship where I could express myself in another way. And that also came to happen later on. And I think Martinus' analysis could help me understand what am I going through, what is happening to me. And the thing, for example, where you get in love or you fall in love with another person, Martinus talks about that is kind of, and we also know it without Martinus, you could be a little bit confused when you are falling in love. You are sort of not yourself. You live up in the blue, and if the person you are in love with also loves you back, well, everything is great. But then after a few months or perhaps a year, everything is not so great anymore, and there we are, being who we really are, and maybe we have married a person who is not the person we really want to live with, but that's not so easy to change if you have 2 kids or so, 3 kids, and you have a big house and you have a lot of loans and 2 cars and whatever. So you're sitting there with a life you don't really want it to happen, but well, so many people go through that, I think.
Exactly. I think confusion is perhaps the key word. And I know that we have mutual friends and who also teach Martinus cosmology and have done that for many years. And many people who they have talked to just say this, that there must be something wrong with me. And the relief when they find some explanations and answer, and that could be many questions within this topic. It could be that you don't actually feel like having sex at all with anyone, sort of asexual, and that's a problem I think in some countries, like for Japan or whatever. It could be that young people just are not interested in having sex any longer. And then the society tries to sort of encourage them in different ways, but it seems to be difficult. But it could also be, as you say, you marry in young years, get a family, happy with that, and 5 years later on, you feel like it's as marriage was too narrow, and the only thing you want to do is get out of that marriage, and you can feel split between different duties, and there are so many things in this confusion transition period, that so many questions that people could have had. And also when you find a partner, and I guess that's the same for whatever kind of partnership it is, you don't just you fall in love with one part of that person, and it's mainly our primary pole that falls in love. That's the capacity of our primary pole, which Martinus would also say it's in a way it's a very egoistic part, and I think that's something perhaps psychologists also would agree to, that it's not really an intellectual process, falling in love. It just happens amazed. And then later on you could develop a more mature love and understanding. But then we have our two poles in a way. We are four people in a relationship because we are two poles. And that's, of course, regardless of whether it's a heterosexual couple or a homosexual couple. As you say, you can have different interests, different sides. So it's a very interesting and exciting phase, but also could be confusing and a lot of suffering, because especially what you have told about homosexuals, but perhaps today in our part of the world is even more true when we talk about transgender people and so on, that there is actually a lot of psychological suffering when you don't feel that you belong in society, and so on. So of course this is a serious area as well, where you really need that kind of tolerance that you talked about, because if there is one thing that Martinus really stresses, it's the importance of tolerance. It has made a great impression on me that we need to be tolerant. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. He writes a lot about tolerance and intolerance in the volume 1 of Livets Bok, and that's also why I find his work so rewarding to read, because he is really tolerant towards every living being on earth, or perhaps in the universe, because he is a double-poled individual, of course, Martinus, and he has this cosmic consciousness, and he is a part of the Godhead's primary consciousness, even though he went to this planet to engage in a mission to describe this for us and to explain the mystery of life to us, and inspire to a new moral and a new society, and a peaceful society. And tolerance, I think it's I often look at movies and read books and listen to people who have these experiences, and I am grateful for that. There is a lot of tolerance in society nowadays. We have some really good examples of people who have changed their gender identity way up in their age. I'm reading a book now about the Danish. He is Swedish, or she, sorry, is Swedish, but she is working in Denmark. Caroline Farberger, you know of her, and she changed her gender identity in her 50s, I think, and she really prepared this because she is working as a CEO, is it called that in English?
CEO,
Yeah, on a big company, and that's really difficult to be a man, to change into a woman in a position like that, and to regain your confidence within all the staff you are serving or working with. And also, she is, or at least were, married and had 2 children, but she planned this in different ways, and really went through this transition in a really good way. And the way I understand it, she is really happy with this life. And so that's a really good example of where her colleagues and her company supported her totally in this, and articles were written about her in the economic magazines, and they also supported her. So these people are sort of förebild. What is the English word? Role model, perhaps.
Role models, thank you.
Role model for...
we need Mary, our translator.
Yeah, well, if you can have these good examples in society, that brings about a lot of tolerance, and we see that there are a lot of tolerance out there in society, and that feels really good. So we are going to a more positive society. Of course, there are also negative thoughts and feelings, and so there are parallel ways in society. But anyway, it's going in the right direction, I think. So.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that example, because as some of you might know, if you have visited the Martinus Center, we have summer courses, 6 weeks in the summer where we have courses every summer, and the last 2 weeks are international courses. But then we have a special study group where we watch different films, current affairs, you could call it. So we actually included a short film about this woman who used to be a man earlier, and we could follow her transition, preparing, as you said, she prepared it carefully, also including the way, of course, she dresses and haircut and so on. But I remember that you told me, I don't know if you remember, that because we prepared that course and chose the different films that, well, but like walking with those high heels and lipstick. I remember you said to me, well, you don't want that, Pernilla, do you?
I don't want to go with high heels, and I don't want to go in a dress. I would feel really awkward to do what she did. But that's where tolerance comes along. But because, as we said earlier, Martinus says that we don't change sex between our lives. So I haven't been a woman, probably. I can't believe that I have been a woman before, and I'm not thriving or striving to be a woman in a coming life. But I'm not afraid of my perhaps feminine sides that are within me, but I don't have to express them in my way of talking or dressing or walking or makeup and so forth. But another man perhaps want to express it in that way, because that's how he or she feels inside. And I'm not even sure if Carolina was born in the wrong sex, and according to Martinus, it's a difficult question. We generally don't change sex. We can stay at that. So we generally don't does it. No, perhaps some kind of changes take place. We don't know, but in general we don't. And but we can anyway have these feelings that I'm not at ease with living as a man. I don't have these feelings inside me that corresponds with the society's expectations of who I should be or how I should behave. Because Caroline, she was really a man who was quite a man in some ways, because he was hiking and diving, and he was really great in electricity and things that typically male are really good at. So he had, of course, a lot of masculine capacities, or masculine as we have come to think of them. Nowadays, females, of course, can go hiking and diving and engaging in electricity and fixing up, whatever. The differences between men and women are not so big anymore, like they used to be if we go back to the 19th century. So, but I think anyway that many people want to explore their inner feelings of they have some sort of feminine thoughts and feelings, and they admire other females' clothing and way of behaving, and that I would like to be something like that. So I see it as kind of exploring of who I am or where I am going as a human being. So even if I wanted to dress up as a woman and have long hair and do makeup every day, well, why shouldn't I do that? Society should be very tolerant about that. If I want to do it, what's the problem? I'm not harming anyone with this behavior. But people are in general very skeptical if you don't fit into the narrow gender identity and sexual identity, and even amongst gay people there are, as I have experienced anyway, some sort of intolerance of gay men who are typically very feminine. Also, as a gay man, you should be masculine, and so that's the so. And I have never really understood that. Why is it so? Why everyone has to be like everybody else? I don't understand it. So that's a good thing about Martinus, that he really stresses that we should be tolerant towards everything and everybody. So we can learn a lot about.
Exactly. And of course, he also explains that the intolerance that we see in so many areas, not least in this area, also in other areas, of course. Today, we could also talk about the nationalistic intolerance towards people who feel they don't belong to us and so on. Martinus would say that also belongs to the one pole state, to the animal kingdom, where it's actually a very selfish state, where you mostly care about yourself. And that goes for men and women, females and males. And then you care about your partner and your offspring. And perhaps in sort of a widened sense, you also care about your nation, but otherwise it's a very egoistic state. And that's why you also feel intolerant against anyone who deviates from the flock, you could say, from the herd. So that he explains that too, that it's part of our development that you have this intolerance. But in our state, in our phase, it's so important to understand those processes, not least in the sexual area, because it could also be very harmful to be intolerant. And by reading his analysis, we gain understanding and tolerance and help in order to understand ourselves better and other people better, and also actually the development of our whole society. But perhaps just to wrap it up with the last question, and this hasn't been rehearsed at all, I should say. So but it just struck me when I heard your story. If a young person would come to you, let's say 20 years old, the same age as you were at the time when you met Martinus's works, and let's say that person, perhaps regardless of whether it's a young man or a young woman, but would come to you and say, I feel so insecure about my sexuality, but I feel that I don't fit in. I don't feel a longing for the opposite sex. I feel this sympathy for my own sex, but perhaps my family or my surroundings, but that could still happen, as you say, also in Sweden. I mean, it depends on where you come from and what background you have. If a young person would come to you and sort of would like to have some advice to understand himself or herself better, what do you think you would say to that person?
Yeah, well, I would probably inspire this person to go to places where he or she could meet people of their own age who share the same experience. Because in Sweden you can go to, they have a sort of rainbow house or RFSL, they are called. Well, I have a friend who is about 50 years old. He lives with my sister. He is sort of he's in foster care with
Yeah.
her, and he has some difficulties with his gender identity, and well, he think of himself as gay, I'm quite sure, but he also has some issues with his gender identity. Am I a girl? Am I a boy? Right now, I think he defines himself as a boy, but he has gone through phases where he had described himself as a girl. But he goes to places where he can meet other youngsters in the same age, and they understand him better than I can, because, well, I can maybe talk about feelings towards people of the same sex, and I can describe my own feelings and thoughts, and of course he knows that I live with a man, and he have met us, but I'm not so sure about this gender identity issue. I don't know that much about that, how it feels inside. I can understand it in relation to Martinus analysis, but it's more difficult for me to understand what he is going through with that. But I would also advise him to follow your inner voice and follow your own feelings, and that those feelings who feels really right for you. This is something I want to explore. This is something I want to understand better. Then go to that direction and explore it, because probably that will be the right way to go. So you can gain nothing about, well, I hesitate. I don't want to meet other people. I don't like these feelings. I would really not, what do you say, encourage those thoughts. Quite the opposite. You must listen to your own thoughts and feelings, and you must get experiences. You must meet other people and talk to other people, and of course perhaps make mistakes. I did some mistakes also when I was 18, 19, 20. I met some people well, this didn't go very well, but well, it was an experience, and now I know what I don't want to do and how I don't want to live. So we all go through different phases where we sort of moved in the wrong direction, but well, yeah, I don't know. It's
No, it
difficult
sounds
to
like
guide young people.
it's probably not a coincidence or it is not a coincidence, since there are no coincidences. Martinus would say that you have met this young person and could give that kind of advice that person needs right now. It sounds wonderful, I think, and we know through Martinus everything, even if we have some painful experiences, some confusion in this, but everything is moving towards it's our way towards becoming a true human being, and we know that. So in that sense, that we know that all these transformations are just sort of birth pangs, as he would call it.
Yeah.
We are looking forward to actually being born again as real human beings, where we have the capacity to love everyone. And that, of course, is also the great framework that makes it so much easier to embrace everything that happens with understanding and tolerance, as you have said. Well, thank you so much, Micael. That was great.
Thank you, Pernilla. It was interesting and fun.
It's interesting to explore this topic because it's also, I think, always a very personal topic.
Yeah.
And at the same time connected to the universal development that Martinus describes. So we'll continue our journey. We'll wrap it up for today. Thank you so much, Micael, for being with us.